Welcome back to the Wargrove of Woe. In today's video, we're going to be starting a new series going over all of the playstyles for every army in Age of Sigmar 3.0. This video is going to be focusing entirely on the Grand Alliance Order armies, but in the future I will cover Chaos, Destruction, and Death all in their own videos. So, without further ado, let's get started. So, when I say what type of playstyle an army has, what does that actually mean? Well, it basically sums up how a specific army will play for the most part. Of course, with this type of list, there's going to be outliers in terms of how you specifically build your list, but this video is just going to be going over the primary playstyle and kind of what the army is known for and what they are generally good at. You can tailor an army to do mostly anything if you really want to, and there won't be much to stop you, but this is just kind of a general overview for new players who are kind of looking at all of the different armies and trying to figure out which one would fit a specific playstyle they have in mind. And with that said, how am I defining playstyles? Well, for starters, in my head there are three different basic playstyles. This is your core of how your army is going to function and how they are going to achieve victory. And then there's a whole bunch of different modifiers that kind of tailor the basic playstyle in different ways. So the three basic playstyles are an aggressive or a rush faction. That is your Iron Jaws, your Daughters of Kane, and a whole bunch of other factions that like to get into your enemy's face as fast as they can and just sweep the floor with them. This is kind of a very brute force type of playstyle, just run over your enemy. Then there is a defensive or cagey or castle type of army. These guys want to kind of weather the storm and outlast the opponent through attrition and just preventing the opponent from outright running them over. Defensive playstyles tend to work around a specific niche or rule that helps them weather the tide. And then movement factions are a little bit interesting. Movement, trickery, and finesse factions tend to try and win on points or try to outmaneuver their opponents through some form of teleportation, fast movement, or other rules that really allows them to kind of run circles around their opponent and be wherever their opponent cannot be. There's a ton of different playstyle modifiers. For the most part, they kind of affect how an army is going to express their basic playstyle. And as they come up in this list, I will talk about them more specifically. But just for some examples, there is fast and slow, tanky and squishy, horde, elite, or generalist. And then the very centric army focuses either on hero hammer, infantry, or monsters, and kind of big behemoth type of units, and then how they're going to deal their damage, either magical, martial, or ranged. Now, this is not necessarily the end-all be-all for every faction. This is just my thoughts on it. So first up in the Grand Alliance order is Cities of Sigmar. So their primary playstyle is they like to castle. If you take a look at the Cities of Sigmar roster, each of the kind of quote-unquote old world races, your elves, your dwarves, and your humans, all that jazz, they all tend to have the same core units. Some infantry, some heroes, maybe a monster or two, and then a fairly beefy ranged unit. Cities of Sigmar excels at your standard mode of warfare of have your infantry up front and then lines of either handguns, artillery, or bows and ranged units behind them to pepper the opponent and kind of force your opponent to peel apart your castle to get to your damage dealers. Now that is just kind of a general idea of how cities play. More recently, they've kind of become a pseudo Stormcast Eternals army just because of how good Stormcast dragons are. For the most part, it's kind of like, how many Stormcast units can I include in this while it's still being considered a Cities of Sigmar army? Which is a little sad, but we'll see how that develops in the future. For primary playstyle modifiers, Cities of Sigmar is very horde-like. All of their units are incredibly cheap. They can field mass infantry formations, and they are fairly generalist in everything. The thing with Cities of Sigmar is you have so many war scrolls. You pretty much have a tool for whatever situation you might need. It might not be the best tool for the job in the grand scheme of things, but you have that tool. And that is a power in of itself. So if you are looking for kind of a castle-focused horde infantry army, Cities of Sigmar is a great choice. It's also a good one if you like souping in Stormcast Eternals. Because even though kind of the meta is how many dragons can I fit in a Cities of Sigmar army, there's still a lot of Stormcast units that just for fluff or flavor can be included in Cities of Sigmar and really amp up the beefiness of the army. Next up is Daughters of Kane. Now, Daughters of Kane, more than any other faction, in my opinion, besides a few, say, Ironjaws or Slaanesh, really hammers home a rush primary playstyle. They want to get in your face really fast and then just run you over. They are very fast, very squishy, in a primarily martial-focused army. The meta build for Daughters of Kane right now is Marathi and then as many bow snakes as you can fit in a unit. But the book as a whole tends to do most of its damage in the martial kind of close combat style phase. There isn't really much to that other than Daughters of Kane, their power comes from the stacking buffs and getting into your opponent's face before it's optimal for them, before they set up. You want to pick a target and get their turn one and just wreak havoc in their lines. Next up is Fire Slayers. Now, the Fire Slayers new battle tome is around the corner, so kind of take this with a grain of salt. This could change entirely based on how the new battle tome comes out. But as of right now, with their second edition battle tome, Fire Slayers tend to play aggressively. More so in the vein of they are a little bit tanky in that they have most of their units, I think all of their units have at least 2 wounds. They are a little slow and they are a little bit elite. They focus entirely on their infantry and doing damage in the combat phase. They don't have much range, and their prayers and magic are mostly focused on buffing up their units. Next is Idoneth Deepkin. Similarly with the Fire Slayers, take this evaluation with a grain of salt. This can and most likely will change a little bit with the 3.0 battle tome that they are set to get. But as of right now, Idoneth Deepkin has a aggressive movement primary playstyle. For the most part, Idoneth Deepkin is all about their speed and taking engagements that are going to benefit them. That alongside their Tides of Death table that lets them really mess with the flow of the battle, really puts them in the camp of being a fast, generalist, monster-centric army. And when I say monster-centric, that doesn't mean it has to have the monster keyword. This can mean allopax or cavalry, eels, all of their kind of specialist units that they focus really heavily on. I think in the new battle tome they're going to shift more towards a flat generalist approach with more Namarti kind of holding the line and having some more balance in the internal data sheets of the codex, because right now Namarti are fine, but they're just not nearly as good as eel spam. Before I move on to the next few, I'd like to give an extra special thanks to my Patreon supporters, especially Nick Hoff. You guys really allow me to continue to grow this channel and this community, and I would really like to thank you guys for that. If you are interested in becoming a Patreon member and getting certain benefits like early access, premium Discord access, and a channel that I try to be more active in, and a few other benefits, there is a link to the Patreon in the description below. Or if you just want to join the Discord and come hang out, see what's going on in the community, there will also be a link to the Discord in the description below. Next up is Caradron Overlords. These guys are your steampunk dwarves, and they have a primarily defensive movement playstyle. Now this is a very interesting one because Caradron Overlords, generally speaking, are slow because they're dwarves, but their boats and their flyers allow them to really move around the battlefield at an unparalleled level. They are also a very generalist, ranged focused army. Really, KO is all about shooting at your opponent and moving around where you can't get hit, and then kind of coming in and sweeping up the remains to capture your victory points. Next is Luminous Realm Lords. So Luminous Realm Lords tends to play a very castle and defensive primary playstyle. They are all about setting up a defensive line and taking you out before you can score enough points or get far enough ahead. They also have a very heavy emphasis on magic and ranged. The core of a Luminous Realm Lords unit, or excuse me, Luminous Realm Lords army is going to be your Sentinels and Techless. And I think that this might change in the future just because of how strong that combo is. But for now, Luminous loves to play defensively. Their whole book is lined up around defense and kind of whittling your opponent away with magic and ranged. Next up is Seraphon. Seraphon is interesting in that they can do pretty much everything. But for the sake of simplicity in this video, I give them an aggressive castle playstyle, which is a little bit of an odd one. So what do I mean by this? So the core of your Seraphon is probably going to be Lord Croak or another Slan, and then some skinks or salamanders or other big monsters to protect your Slan or Croak, and then using magic and big skink blobs to really hamper your opponent's everything. Seraphon also thrive on board control and just kind of board presence with the range of their spells and unbinds and teleportation shenanigans and extending range with oracles, or magical range, excuse me. Seraphon can kind of really dominate the board in all areas. And that's just the primary way Seraphon is currently built. You can build a monster mash army and just kind of try to run over your opponent with lots of Bastiladons and Carnosaurs and all the big dinosaurs if you really want to. So Seraphon is great in that it has a lot of flexibility in that way and a lot of wonderful internal codex, or excuse me, battle tome balance. So very interesting faction. Next up is the Stormcast Eternals, the poster children of Age of Sigmar. These guys have a very odd playstyle for being a poster child in that they are all about movement, which I think is a good thing because Stormcast Eternals is very geared towards new players and getting new players into the game. And so being a primarily movement-based playstyle, either through deep striking or teleporting with their translocation prayer or astral compasses, it really hammers home the idea of board control and kind of gives players a way to learn how to control the board and control the objectives and kind of pick apart certain aspects of your opponent's army. In more recent times, it's been a little bit monster focused with the Stormcast dragons, but for the most part, I think it's safe to say that they are a movement primary playstyle. Some modifiers on that is, for the most part, Stormcast are really tanky. They are elite, and I would say that they are monster / infantry focused, with emphasis on ranged and martial. Their magic is fine, but really it's more of a tool to use in order to get your other units into position and kind of buff them up to where they need to be. Stormcast Eternals is a wonderful faction for new players. I think it really helps teach them the ins and outs of the game. And besides the outliers of the 3rd edition book, I think they're a really good faction in terms of internal balance. You have a lot of data sheets in the Stormcast Eternals book, and for the most part, I can see a use for the majority of them, which is kind of hard to do when you have so many units. Last but not least is Sylvanath. Sylvanath I would give a primary playstyle of movement and defensive. For the most part, a lot of Sylvanath War Scrolls somewhat underperform, and so in order to mitigate that, they need to use their wildwoods to their advantage with movement shenanigans and defensive buffs. As for the army in general, I think that they are a generalist monster / hero-centric army. All of the Sylvanath infantry and battle line is pretty bad, except for tree revenants and dryads to move / hold the line. But they don't do it as well as some other armies infantry does, so for the most part, I'd say that it's monster-centric or hero-centric. Additionally, Sylvanath gets a lot of their power out of their magic and certain martial-focused units. There's not a lot of range in Sylvanath, so they kind of have to get up there or skirt around and take key fights that are to the Sylvanath player's advantage. And the various magical tools that Sylvanath has access to is very, very strong. So that is it for part 1 of Army Playstyles overview. Overall, I think that Grand Alliance Order has a pretty nice spread of different playstyles and different armies to give them a lot of diversity, it's nice to see. In my next video, I will probably cover Chaos, as that is the second big selection of factions, and they have a lot of interesting ones that I am excited to cover. But if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like or a comment, and if you'd like to see more content like this in the future, please consider subscribing. This has been the Wargrove of Woe, and I'll see you guys next time.